So, how is your trill? Do you have a spectacular trill? Is it hit or miss that sometimes it comes out and sometimes you're not sure whether it will or not? When I listen to audition arias, I often hear singers leaving out trills, and when that happens, I wonder why that is. Is it because they've tried but they think that their particular voice just isn't capable of developing a good trill? Is it because they think that they're trilling, but what we hear isn't quite what it is that they're hearing when they're doing it, and so the trill doesn't quite come out the way they think it is? I think that a lot of singers find a trill an elusive thing to develop, so today I'd like to share some techniques for developing a fantastic trill. A trill is just a quick fluctuation in pitch. In classical music, it's going to involve either a half step or a whole step. And for the duration of the trill, you'll just be moving back and forth between these two pitches. The two pitches are going to involve the pitch that you actually see printed in your score, and then the pitch that's either a half step or a whole step above it. But the pitch that you're looking at is going to be the lower of the two pitches involved in your trill. When I'm playing an instrument like a piano, even though my piano skills leave a lot to be desired, I can play a successful trill because all I need to do is mash one key and then the other, and you're going to hear both notes. You're going to hear the trill because each of these keys is activating a different string. But when you sing, you've only got the one pair of vocal folds. So for me to fluctuate between two pitches that are very, very close together with my vocal folds is going to be a little tricky if I'm not willing to completely give up control. And I think this is what makes it difficult for singers to trill, that they really want to precisely define each of these pitches in quick succession. It doesn't quite work that way. At least that's not how I learned to trill. I was a clarinetist for many years before I was a singer, and so I would practice my trills by just going slowly and then going a little fast. And so just building speed like that would get the coordination going with my fingers. But the voice doesn't quite work like that, because if I go between these two pitches, and I'm sort of mechanistically moving between the two of them, I'm only going to be able to speed up so fast. At some point, if I really want a good trill, I'm going to have to just let go, give up control, and let my vocal folds flop back and forth between those two pitches. You can't really micromanage or control a trill. It's a very vulnerable, uncontrolled movement. And I think this is one of the reasons that singers have a hard time mastering it, because we have to do it on such a small interval. And the closer together two notes are, the more most of us want to kind of like micromanage and make sure we're getting the pitch accurate. But if I try to micromanage my trill and just make these two notes alternate more rapidly, what might happen is something like this. I'll start out slowly so I can like check this pitch, check that pitch, and then just assume that I'm going to keep alternating between these two pitches. But what will often happen is something like this. You don't really hear a trill, right? What you're hearing is a kind of exaggerated vibrancy. The pitch fluctuation is a little bit wider than my normal vibrato. It might be a little bit faster. So you're hearing sort of more than one pitch, but mostly you're just hearing the lower pitch. You're not hearing the higher pitch. And when you do a trill, we have to hear both pitches very well defined. So the way that I recommend practicing giving up control is the equivalent of having your larynx do what it needs to do to change pitches, between sort of micromanaging it and stiffly moving your wrist like this, and then letting it just go crazy. And it's a lot easier for us to do this with our voices on wider intervals than just the minor second or the major second that a trill is going to require. So if I start on this pitch and just sort of ululate instead, then you're hearing two pitches. It's a crazy sound, and it doesn't really belong in my classical singing, at least none of the pieces that I've been working on so far. But it's a good way to practice the movement and feel the relaxation and the giving up control, especially since I know it's going to be a ridiculous noise. It's not going to be a good noise. It's just useful to practice the flexibility that you need for a trill. And doing it on a wider interval or making a noise that you don't even care if it sounds like it's out of control or out of tune is a good way to start. Here's an exercise that I find very useful for working on trills. I'm going to eventually hope to trill between this B and a C sharp, which is the trill that appears at the beginning of the Jules song, Marguerite's aria from the opera Faust. There's a long extended trill on a B up to a C sharp at the beginning. So I'm going to practice a wider interval first. This is an exercise that was devised by W. Stephen Smith. It's called the wobble, and it involves alternating between two pitches that are fourth apart. And the rhythm's going to go quarter note, quarter note, quarter note, quarter note, 16th notes, and then sustain. So you're going to start going slowly and moving very smoothly between these two pitches, then practice just sort of letting it flop back and forth between the pitches, and then sustain. It's going to go like this. Again, I'm starting on the B because I want to be able to trill on the B, but the wider interval is going to help me practice the movement that I need for a good trill. So that's sort of flopping back and forth with my airflow steady and continuing to think a good vowel really helps me to feel like I've got the flexibility to move away from this low note and devote equal time to both pitches. So now if I try to do the trill, I'm going to get into a little bit slowly. I'm going to alternate between my B and my C sharp, and then I'm just going to let it go, and I'm going to try to continue to hear both of these pitches while I'm doing it, but I'm going to keep my throat really, really loose like when I was doing the wobble exercise. It's going to go like this. Now, here's the thing about trills. If you were in the room with me, I'd have to ask you, did you hear both notes? Did you hear a whole step trill? Because what I'm hearing when I know that my trill is correct and in tune is a little bit wider interval than what is actually happening, what you guys are going to hear out in the room. I'm actually hearing something that's closer to a minor third in my ear. So I've gotten used to what it sounds like to me when I know that it's right out in the room, but that can take some getting used to. And I think that this is one of the reasons why when people trill, we hear sort of an exaggerated vibrancy rather than two distinct pitches that are a precise interval apart, because they may be hearing a trill, but the interval is actually a lot closer together than what it is that they think that they're doing. So have fun, be exploratory, and above all, have patience while you're trying to develop a trill. It can take some getting used to. The feeling of giving up control and the wildness of the response that leads to the execution of a really great trill can feel very disembodied or vulnerable or weird. If you are in the habit of just wanting to make sure that every vowel is beautiful and every note's perfectly in tune, then there may be some residual holding in your throat that you're going to have to sort of work through to be able to just kind of launch yourself into a trill like this. But keep at it and you'll get it. All voices are capable of being taught to trill, and the flexibility required for a good trill is going to do great things for your technique elsewhere too. It's going to help you sustain a beautiful even legato, it's going to help you with your scales and cadenzas, and it's going to help you give up control, which we all need a little bit of that in performance so that we can be as present and spontaneous as possible with the material that we've practiced so hard.
Aus alten Märchen winkt